Good morning, everyone. Yes, indeed, I started life as a banker at the age of 1. I actually ran a bank in Hong Kong for a couple of years, so I'm very familiar with the city and the country, and it's a pleasure being back here. I also noted this morning that the wonderful organisation behind this, the Hong Kong Anti-Cancer Society, was described as old, because it's 1963, which was my birth year. So I'm feeling particularly old this morning, and thank you for reinforcing that point as I suffered with only 3 hours sleep last night. Nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you all for turning up in your numbers to attend a very important day for Hong Kong. I have a challenge. I have to present the global challenge of NCDs and cancer in less than 20 minutes now, as been guided by my Master of Ceremonies, which I'll try to stick to. And I'm trying to cover big subjects in one slide. Okay, so forgive me if it's pithy, forgive me if it feels a bit shallow, but it's important that we understand all the puzzle pieces in this world in order to see the whole puzzle. So there are people in this room who have far more expertise than I do in many of the subjects that I will cover. But the good thing about UICC is we're a broad church, and we bring all those experts together to have a powerful voice and to have a powerful impact. So I will cover UICC very briefly on the basis that many of you will have heard of UICC. And just to reiterate Princess Dina's words at the beginning, we are a broad organisation. There is a small team in Geneva, but the UICC's strength is the groups like the Hong Kong Anti-Cancer Society, CACA in China, the Korean organisations. All of these regional organisations, country organisations, are part of the family, and that's the power of the UICC. I'll talk about the challenge of cancer control, what's going on in the background, how it has been recognised at a global level, and what we're doing to accelerate progress. The beautiful thing about following Princess Dina Mourad is that her energy and enthusiasm inspires you to be energetic and enthusiastic, but you can never reach that same level, unfortunately. So my presentation may seem somewhat dry, okay? However, it's important that I do cover some very basic points in order for us to understand the challenges that we jointly face around the world. And in accelerating process, Princess Dina Mourad also very kindly used most of my messages. So I will repeat them because it's important that we repeat them, because the more we say them, the more they are likely to happen. So it's great. But that's okay, because she's speaking later, and I'm going to cover her presentation as well. Overview of UICC. So we are indeed old. Is anyone here from 1933? Because I feel bad now. Is anyone? But we are 1933. We're over 1,100 members now in 164 countries. We're based in Geneva, and we're enjoying fantastic relationships with the UN system on behalf of the cancer community. We are an award-winning organisation. Last few years we've won several awards. We've actually won another award which I can't tell you about, but will be announced in a couple of weeks' time, and we will let our community know about that. We put this up because we aspire to be as good as we can for our members around the world, and it's important, if you want to influence the political system, you have to be a quality organisation. I'm very proud of the organisation which I lead, which runs from quality from the top all the way through its membership. We also have globally recognised leaders in cancer control. This was our board last week, which has now changed, and I have not been able to update it. But good thing is that Anne Lee is still part of the UIC board, and we welcome you onto it. So well done, Anne. We unite the cancer community, and the cancer community we define as anyone who has an impact on cancer. So it's important for us as a community that we talk to governments, we talk to the UN system, we talk to oncologists around the world, we talk to patient groups, and we also talk to the private sector, managing the conflicts of interest inherent in all those conversations to make sure that we pull the groups together on a common ambition. And that common ambition is obviously to reduce the cancer burden in the future and to lower the number of people who die unnecessarily from a cancer-related illness. Our areas of focus are convening, uniting the world, as Mary Gospodarovich described it a few years ago when she was the president. We also improve the way in which our cancer organisations operate around the world through capacity building that helps address inequity. And we also, on behalf of the cancer community, conduct advocacy at the highest level. We also have a reputation for creating new organisations. This is important. Okay? There are some problems in the world that can only be addressed through partnership. They cannot be done alone in separate silos. We were one of the founding partners of the NCD Alliance back in 2009, and that organisation became free of the organisations that set it up. Is this working? Yes. Is it working? Okay, yes. Right. It became free of those who were setting it up last year and became its own NGO. It is 1 year old. Is anyone 1 year old in the room? No, okay. We also help set up the tobacco-free portfolios. We've established a law centre with Cancer Council Victoria in Australia. We have helped the Spanish establish World Cancer Research Day in September every year, and we've worked with NCI and others to create the International Cancer Control Partnership. And we play an active role in all these partnerships, all the different groups, because we believe they add value collectively rather than us working individually. Let me talk about the challenge of cancer control globally. A main driver behind the numbers that you all see in every country is an ageing population which is growing. Fundamentally, that drives the numbers that we see from our colleagues from IARC every year when they reassess the number of cancer cases we can anticipate in the future. We had some wonderful presentations from Chris Wild in Kuala Lumpur at the World Cancer Congress this week when he explained the drivers of the numbers that we are seeing in the future. Now, unfortunately, Chris leaves IARC at the end of the year, but I do wish that at some point we will have an IARC director presenting the global figures going forward where they're not going like that, they're actually going like that. But we are some way off doing that at the moment. We're also a world that's getting larger. This is not me progressing through my 20s, 30s and 40s, but no doubt there are some men here who are squeezing in their stomachs as I speak, as they recognise the pouch of the 50s moving into the bigger pouch of the 60s. Unfortunately, it's a problem that every country faces. I'm not aware that any country has yet found a way of reversing that trend, although there are some experts in front of me who maybe can pull out some good examples. But generally, we're a world that is getting bigger and we haven't been able to stop it. We are smoking no less. This chart is not taken from the cancer community, it's taken from the tobacco industry. As you know, there is a tailing off of the number of cigarettes which are sold around the world, driving the profits of the executives who are sitting beside the pools, as Princess Dina Moread described earlier. And in this part of the region, you are aware there is a significant number of smokers. That number is not declining, unfortunately, in total, and therefore the profitabilities of the industry continue. And if you wrap around that the advance of e-cigarettes around the world, which are being targeted not at the smoker to give up, but to young people to take up, and for the the smoker who's given up to come back into the fold, then we still face a major smoking and e-smoking epidemic in the future. Those that argue that e-cigarettes are less dangerous than cigarettes, the old traditional cigarettes, are probably talking a little bit too quickly because we haven't had time to find out yet. But let's see what happens. Nonetheless, the industry is still very profitable and it delivers an awful lot of profit and dividends to its shareholders. As a result of all of those background things, aging and a number of people in the world, inability to control obesity, lack of physical activity as well, another issue which we have to consider in this mix. These are the current projections which came out of IARC only a couple of weeks ago. And we're looking at this year, we're looking at 16.1 more cases of cancer in the world, 9.6 million deaths. And as I said, the bubble is getting bigger and bigger. It will be good at one point when we can show that bubble to get smaller. This is a breakdown of that large number into less developed and more developed countries. And as mentioned earlier, 70% of the growth in the incidence and mortality will occur in low, middle-income countries, places in the world which are less able to respond to that growing burden. As Chris Wild described it this week, the world is going pink. Okay? The leading cause of death for women around the world in most countries in 20 years' time will be breast cancer. This is the increase by region. As you can see, significant increases in the low and middle income country parts of the world. Not so much in the developed world, but nonetheless the overall burden is moving in the wrong direction. And it does depend on where you live, what your chances of survival are. This is some data that we presented a few years ago, which is still relevant today because the overall numbers haven't changed. And it lists all the cancers across the top. and it shows the dark colour is the 5-year survival rate in a developed country, high-income country, and in low and middle-income countries, the colours change through to orange at the bottom, which is the lowest-income countries, those who struggle to have a health infrastructure at all. But you can see if you just take breast cancer, if you're born if you have breast cancer and you live in a high-income country, your chances of survival are much, much higher than if you are in a low-income country. And of course, there are some cancers, it doesn't matter where you live. Okay, pancreatic, liver, esophagus, your chances of surviving in 5 years, unfortunately, are not any better depending on where you live in the world. Which is interesting because if you take this data from Cancer Research UK, as said earlier, there are so many cancers today where if caught early, we can actually treat and cure. And we must take our hat off to all of those involved in the treatment of individuals, the researchers, the doctors, oncologists that make progress. So if you look at, for example, bowel cancer, if you look at the rate of survival in 1971-72, 0.6 years average life after diagnosis, now up to 10 years. And we can see the same in breast cancer from 5.5 to 9.6. But unfortunately, pancreatic and lung cancer, it's 2 months now for pancreatic. It's still 5 months for lung cancer. So there's progress, scientific progress in the right direction, but it's not catching up with the volumes that we're seeing around the world. Let me talk about the recognition of cancer very quickly, and it's an important part of the work that's been done by you as a community, through UICC, with the Entity Alliance, and many others. This is a rather busy slide, but nonetheless, it does capture what's happened since 2011, when we had the first UN high-level meeting on NCDs in New York, in which Princess Dina Mered was the speaker on behalf of civil society. This was a major step in the right direction. For many years, the UN focus of attention on health issues had been primarily on the communicable diseases, having been embedded in the Millennium Development Goals. But in 2011, the world woke up to the fact that we were facing an NCD epidemic in the longer term, and we needed to address it as quickly as possible. Since then, we've had the UN high-level meeting in 2014, which was a reconfirmation of the need for collective action around the world and the importance of governments to take a lead on that work. And we've had a third high-level meeting the week before last, in which Princess Dina Mered spoke again. Now, in the meantime, we've had a set of targets set out for 2025, including the so-called 25 by 25 target of reducing premature deaths by 25% from NCDs by 2025. Now, that has sort of slipped into the background because the Sustainable Development Goals have now given us another target, which is at least a third reduction in premature deaths through NCDs by 2030. But nonetheless, there's a good point to see where we are progressing in 2025 against those 2030 targets. I think those who are incredibly good at analysing these things would say that we are struggling to get to the 2025 and 2030 target. It's a bit difficult to say whether we are or not, but it's still a large target to aim for, and it should be bringing our communities together. There will be no other high-level meeting before 2025, and I'll talk about that in a moment when I review what happened in New York 2 weeks ago. Along the pathway to getting all of those agreements on NCDs, including a global action plan and also a suite of targets on the risk factors as well, UICC, working with colleagues around the world, have produced a number of publications which I think have actually moved the dial at a global level. Mary Gospodarovich, our ex-president of UIC, is in the audience, we'll be talking later, but she was fundamental in driving a Lancet Commission on radiotherapy, which has changed the dialogue at a global level. For too long, many people assumed that cancer treatment and care was drugs, and radiotherapy was not enjoying the profile that it should have done at that level, and through that commission we were able to show and justify the investment in radiotherapy around the world as being a contributor not only to reducing the number of deaths through cancer, but also being a significant investment for governments because of the impact on GDP in the future. A World Cancer Declaration report gave us a view on where we were in 2016 and prompted action at a national level around the world. And we worked with our colleagues at WHO to improve the essential medicines list for cancer. So now we have a list which is up to date. It was 10 years old. And the work that was done there by 120 specialists around the world has left WHO with an ongoing process, which means it can stay refreshed in the future. So any country that wants to know what basic drugs it should have in their country for cancer, they can take the advice and guidance of our colleagues at WHO. And of course, last year, we were delighted to see a cancer resolution go through the World Health Assembly in May, which pulled together a lot of the great work of the previous 3 to 5 years in a single statement of intent signed up by all countries around the world, which said we are going to improve cancer control in our country. Now that is a significant step for them, but also for us, because it means that we can now work with them in partnership to improve cancer treatment and care in their own country, and they are obliged to follow through on that and report back to the WHO, the World Health Organization, in future. This is that cancer resolution. It was everyone around the table was supportive. All nations supported it. There was a few people who had some concerns about some content, but eventually the resolution was passed unanimously. And I see that as a major step forward for our community. We will fail as a community if we do not use this commitment to change the direction of travel of cancer treatment and care around the world. And hence, as Princess Dina Murad said earlier, UICC's focus is to follow through on this cancer resolution at a national and regional level to ensure that we make the most of this chance that's been given to us. This is, who remembers the film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly? Does anyone remember that? For some Americans. I'm not too sure if this is going to work or not, but it's a film. And it's called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And I put this slide in because last week in Kuala Lumpur, Katie Dane, who's the CEO of the Entity Alliance, wanted to describe what happened at the UN high-level meeting 2 weeks ago with regard to the discussions about NCDs. And she put together a wonderful slide which said there's some good, there's some bad, and there's some ugly. And far be it for me to try and do an eloquent summary of her commentary, but I will try. So 2 weeks ago, the world got together to discuss NCDs for the third time, and they discussed a political declaration which would take us into a new paradigm, bearing in mind, as Princess Dina mentioned, there was general acceptance around all countries that progress had been patchy and overall had not been good enough. We had made some progress, but we had not made good enough progress. One would have thought that that meeting would have accepted the reality that we face and re-energized commitment to a disease which kills, a set of diseases that kills more than anyone else. The truth is, they didn't. What they did was they had a meeting, which is good. They had over 30 heads of state attend that meeting, which is good. They produced a document that was agreed, which is good. However, on the bad side, they did not produce a document which had committed them to anything else than they had contained in the 2014 resolution. It was a remodel. It was a second part of a film. That is unacceptable from our leaders of this globe. Unacceptable. So they repeated what they said in 2014. There was nothing new. They did not commit to find more funding for these diseases and for cancer. A missed opportunity to establish in the minds of all governments that they have to allocate funds to address cancer prevention, treatment and care, and the other NCDs. There was also some wriggling around on previous agreements. Unbelievable. The UN system works on the basis that things are agreed and we move on. We do not have countries question the sense, the integrity, the professionalism of previous representatives of their country by saying, no, the best buys may not be the best buys. With due respect to our American colleagues who I completely and totally love working with, who do a fantastic job around the world, it's unacceptable for the USA to question WHO's best buys. Unacceptable. That was part of the ugly part of it. The other thing was that the industry got all over the process, and we ended up with next to nothing on sugar, salt, and beverages. And as a community, we must look them in the eye and say, what are you doing? You're killing our future children. Do you have no moral fiber at all? You're changing the direction of a resolution which is supposed to help us to create a resolution which which leads to more deaths around the world. So the ugly side of it was the private sector got involved and had too much influence, in my opinion. Overall, though, it's important that we take these resolutions and we do the best we can with them. We can spend the next 7 years arguing at a global level we need more resolutions, but what we really need is national action. And that has to be the focus of our community around the world in the next 7 years. There will be no other high-level meeting. They've decided that. Another missed opportunity. But what there will be is communities around the world taking what we've got and making the most with the countries we work with. So we need to accelerate progress. We cannot go on as we are at the moment. And that's why UICC has created its global campaign of Treatment for All. We will ensure that cancer is in the global dialogues and on universal health coverage, the NCDs. In fact, any major global dialogue where cancer and the other NCDs need to be in place, we will make sure that's there. But now it's time to work at a national level, to convert all those wins into progress, to make sure there are more national cancer control plans. They are being implemented, they are being funded, they're being completed and delivered through civil society and with civil society, so we can at some point in the future see a change in direction of those incidence and mortality figures. These are the major work streams of Treatment for All. I won't cover them in detail. If you want to know about the initiative, please go to the website uicc.org. And of course, the other piece of the puzzle that we're progressing, I won't cover this because you'll have the enthusiasm of Princess Dina Mored talking about the City Cancer Challenge. But the one thing I will say about the City Cancer Challenge is this isn't about UICC. This is about cities. You'll see on that slide no mention of UICC. This is about a community of passionate organisations drawn from civil society, drawn from the professional associations, drawn from the private sector, saying we can help cities improve cancer control in their own populations. We want cities to identify what their needs are, and we, the international community, will bring in the world's experts to address those gaps. It's a simple thing to say. It's multi-sectoral. It's very complicated to get all those parties together, but the value that this will bring in the future, I am sure, will make sure that as cities become larger and larger, we will have treatments in the right place at the right time in the future. Mention was made of Cary, Asunción, Yangon and Kumasi. These are our learning cities. We are still learning. We're progressing well. We will be growing the number of challenge cities around the world in the next 5 years. And the City Cancer Challenge itself will be spinning off from UICC in early next year to become its own NGO. The reason for that is it needs to be structured appropriately to give it a greater chance of success in the future. It's going to be a very exciting few years for the City Cancer Challenge, and I know that my new president will be very enthusiastically supporting it, as well as being a great president for UICC. Thank you very much.